Hey Michael,
Hey Corbin.
good morning. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, man. Hopefully,
I,
some other folks will join as well. We sh
yeah,
we shuffled in around a couple times, so we'll see
I
what.
know these things never work well when it's like a last minute meeting with trying to coordinate just a group of people all over the place. It's probably the worst possible setup, like every time zone and last minute.
Yeah. Was there, I guess one of the things I was wondering when we changed it is I made that comment and then I was thinking it it was like I think you wanted to keep it small. So I was like wondering, is everybody in the States or are there people overseas also?
It's still, I think, predominantly Europe.
Yeah. Where are
Maybe,
you
well,
based?
I'm in Toronto.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Maybe
I
the
think
little,
it's interesting. The group is primarily Europe. I was
yeah,
surprised by that actually.
yeah. I mean, it seems like every working group, like predominantly Europeans, right? Or like the most active contingent.
I wonder why. Like maybe just because like things sort of have leveled out in the US or at least in North America, like in terms of I mean, like from an adoption curve perspective, like it's been happening for a long time over here. I don't know. It's
That's
just the
maybe part
observation.
of it. But I mean, do you interface with you spend time with clients, or are you mostly internal client side?
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, it depends, I guess, on what sector or like what industry you're looking. Like a lot of large companies, they're like, yeah, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't say that adoption's that far along.
Oh, really?
I guess it depends on the company you're
Yeah.
looking.
See, that's the problem. I have like a lot of baggage. Like just because I've been around this industry for a long time. So uh I mean the people that I'm working with have been doing this stuff for eight 8 years, 10 years, like I don't know. So
But is it like it's a self-selecting group, right? They're opting in to work with. Are you on the AWS like professional services team or is it some other
no, I'm on the go-to-market side. So I work
Okay.
with so I have like it changes a little bit every year, but last year most of my customers were on the West Coast, which is,
Yeah.
Silicon Valley companies, you know, most of them are most of them are using containers. Almost everyone is using containers, and most of them are using EKS, like Kubernetes, you know. Um, so it's interesting. It was just an interesting observation when I joined the team that a lot of the folks were based in Europe, and I was like curious, like why there wasn't like more representation from North America specifically. So
Yeah, well, hopefully we can get more folks in. There's plenty of interviews. I mean, part of this is to see what things look like across different regions, like levels of maturity and the degree that product thinking is employed. The interviews that I mean, we just started. So some of the interviews, with larger companies, especially, SAFe comes up a lot in terms of like the operating model for this stuff. And so very quickly you see that a lot of handoffs, a lot of isolation, but then also a lot of talk about like actually trying to get more visibility into things, but not structured for it.
hmm.
So I
Yeah,
want to see early.
I'm like I'm like I'm a little behind on some things. Like I just started learning about team topology stuff and like so I'm trying to like dig into that more, um, which I find like super interesting. And so yeah, I think like it's interesting, especially at AWS, like a lot of our focus is on like our services and technology and less on the people and process side of things. I mean, there's some, um, but not as much, right? And I think that's one of the things that I need to figure out, like how do we get a little bit more rigor around that part of it, like helping people think about the organizational structure, how that
What-
influences like their
It's
performance.
interesting that the some of the like account management folks at AWS that I've met that um, I thought were like really good. The thing they I think all had in common was like they're very product minded salespeople. Like they think about like, okay, well, what's the business trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? What are your people like? How is leadership aligned on this? How does that actually go down to how you build?
Yeah.
So they're kind of almost, yeah, like very producty. I mean, they're not product managers, but they're thinking about how things actually come together. So I think it seems like people are thinking about that in pocket. I mean, I don't have the greatest visibility across the org, but like it seems like there are folks who are very much thinking about how does everything align to actually. It's almost like, yes, AWS services are obviously what we're selling, but we're not like leading with that first. It's like, let's understand your problems, let's build a
Yeah,
relationship,
yeah.
and
Oh yeah.
then obviously we can support you with the things you actually want to do. Um, and so, yeah, it makes sense that then conversations go to like product alignment. Like, do
Yeah.
you know what you're building? Do you know your customers? Do you know
Yeah,
what
and
are
that's a lot of times where I get like pulled in, right? And it's very like technology focused, right? So I'm trying to then go go back up. Um, I mean they do start from like the business problem for sure, right? And like how to it's really about how to grow the business, right? How to help the customer grow their business. But yeah.
how often do you find when you're in those conversations that there's that kind of maybe misalignment? Like people understand the business case for what they're trying to do. But then there's like a misalignment of then how those insights trickle down to like the builders themselves.
Oh, 100%, right? I mean, I spent 15 years working for a financial services company in IT, right? And I remember during that part of my career, like the leaders that I worked for telling me that I needed to understand the business better, right? And I think the hard part is that as a technologist, like your focus is on understanding the technical trends and capabilities and things that you need to be good at that as a tradesperson, right? Um, and so it's like it's like a lot of times, like I remember like at that time it was more like moving towards distributed computing and like pizza boxes, right? Like we'd go buy like 1,000, Sun Microsystem pizza boxes or whatever and deploy those things. And it was more about like how to get good at that. And I didn't really care what ran on top of the box, you know? And I think that's something we see a lot with platform engineering, right? Is that there's a disconnect between providing the platform and like what actually is running on there and how that influences like business applications and like the business itself, you know? So I think it's hard. Like I used to always tell my boss like I don't really like care about banking. I care about technology, you know? And it wasn't until now, like, 15 years later or something, where I'm like, hey, I probably should have paid a little bit more attention to the business problems that we were
What was
working.
it? Can you trace it back
Huh?
to like what was there like some very obvious inflection point where you're like, ah, now I really need to focus on this stuff? Or was it some trickle of thing? Like, how did you get there?
I don't, that's a good question. I'd have to really think about that. I never really like I realized that that happened, but I never really figured out like when. Um, but I mean, even today, like I struggle with I'm working with a lot of organizations around the value of platforms, right? And capturing that. And I don't think one of the reasons why I'm here today is for that purpose. It's because um I do want to connect or figure out some ways of starting to connect platforms to the business outcomes and like helping organizations do that. And that's where things like the organizational structure and the other things that start to come into play like are really important, right? And being able to have those types of conversations. Um, but I don't think I don't find like recently I was working with an organization around their platform KPIs, and there's not like a good reference for that. Like we don't like if you look in the CNCF materials we have and stuff like that, it's very light. Like there isn't like a lot of stuff. And what I'm hoping comes out of some of this research is um some kind of like best practices or um even guidance that helps organizations kind of solve for like these different aspects, right? And I'm doing a lot of work around the maturity assessment. I don't know if you saw that, but part of that is getting on the other side of that assessment or on the other side of the maturity model is like, what do I need to go do to solve for this? Like, I want to solve for this piece. Not everybody should solve for everything, right, on the far end,
Mhm.
but there are certain pieces that people should solve for, or they even self-elect. I need to go solve for this. How do I do it? Like, I need help. Um,
Yeah.
and
So I
then
mean that's a good segue.
yeah,
I guess this is the turn that we get. The
yeah,
Dominic, who's been here for the whole ride, and Corbin, who's super invested and is running a parallel related thing.
Yeah, sorry for being late. I yet have
So
to run an interview in time.
but it's great. I mean, the fact that we're finally starting to roll. I mean, well, it's fresh in your mind. You know what? What was it like?
It was good. I'm very curious if the transcript catched on to it because it's very French. But it was very good. Amadeus is a very interesting case study. I mean, you did the other talk already, the other interview with Amadeus already, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
And we're
they have a weird maturity mix with some things being like very, ad hoc, and then they have a completely open internal open source ecosystem that everybody can just contribute to. That's
it's
weird.
yeah. I don't. I mean, I think this is recorded. I don't know how many people are going to watch this, but
Oh,
just
shit.
just no. I mean, it's fine. The the conversation I had was super interesting. I think we're going to talk to one more person, and then we're getting like they've been super open to supporting
Yeah.
this project. So they're gonna refer us to like POs we can talk to and some leadership above that, and then some consumers of the platform. So I think for context, Corbin, if we can all align on this stuff, that would already be a win for today. So there's like more people who are on the same page. But the goal is to see, to kind of gauge maturity, and part of that, like the level of product thinking, like product operating model stuff, product thinking, Um, and the way we're going about it is, in the interview script, which I'll send. I don't want it to be in the video, but I mean, it's not the worst thing. In the way that we're running this, we're not purists about like conforming to all of the research practices. I think we're still going to get a ton of value in just getting like enough of this data in and then seeing what we learn on the other end. So that is the what I just shared. That probably needs to be pulled out into two things. So one is kind of best practices and workflow for the interviewers. And then the other one is the platform engineering script. So there's a builder script. That's the one we have. And leads, EMs, platform engineers, anybody who's like day to day actively working on platform, um, where we learn about, how they approach deciding what they're going to work on, how do they find their mandate and priorities, you know, how they interact with consumers, what's the relationship with stakeholders, how they're sponsored, funded, um, and how they build, um, do they do discovery, that kind of stuff. Um, what metrics they actually look at, how do they know if they're succeeded or not? How do they roll things out? How do they communicate what they roll out? The scripts we don't have is the leadership one, which I started working on. If anybody wants to help, that would be great. And that's more on to your point, Corbin, the folks who can answer the platform value stuff at the business level. Like folks in the organization who can actually say, no, this is an important strategic initiative for these reasons. Here's what success looks like. Here's how we're funded. Here's, how, the support we have. Here's how we're aligned with executives on it. That's kind of the script that needs to be done. And then there's a script that needs to be completed for the consumer side as kind of a gut check. Builders are telling us, yeah, of course um, we do surveys. Maybe we don't reach out as much as we like. Maybe it's all ad hoc. Maybe we don't really kind of do any kind of synthesis on insights and priorities come to us from on above. Um, Whatever that looks like, we want to kind of just gut check it with the people who are actually using the platform. What's their experience like? Can they contribute to it? Do they know what's going on? Can they um, um, like reach out to the platform team? Can they, how do they actually um, talk to the team about like what their let's say application, or one of the stream-aligned in the topologies model, what their needs as a stream-aligned team are, and what's the relationship to the platform. Um, that's kind of the ideal, that kind of trifecta of folks. Then we can triangulate what the reality looks like from the leadership level, from the builder and consumer level, into as many kind of companies as we can as a baseline. Then we can start seeing, are we only talking to large companies? Is there a gap in certain domains that maybe we want to start targeting explicitly to kind of round out the data? That's the general approach. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess, looking at this really for the first time, any obvious questions?
Well, I'm just thinking about how many interviews you need to do. Um, right? Like because I guess part of this was that I was planning to bring in some of the organizations that I work with pretty regularly and have some relationships where maybe they'd be open for something like this. Um, so I'm trying to think about like at each level, like those folks, right? So, I mean, that's 3 interviews per company. And then you need like a cross section of companies, right? So, I was just trying to get a sense of like how many interviews do you plan to do? 100 or 300 or
Yeah, we don't really have a hard number. In part, like as we go, we'll see what kind of early patterns or insights emerge, and then we can decide that we're starting with
Also,
builders and tech.
like there's not that much activity around it yet. I will
Yeah.
be happy if we have like 10 companies with all three, personas on
Yeah, yeah,
those
yeah.
10 companies, at least for first synthesis, because that's like we need to look at what's the early outcome that we can deliver, even if it's not the widest data set yet, just to get people motivated to bring in more.
Yeah.
so I, I guess like and again like probably some of these are like I haven't done enough reading yet to be honest, but like I'm curious like if you think that you're going to see much difference from this exercise than what's already in the maturity model from the perspective of like patterns, right? Like in theory, like doing this exercise is going to basically show like the characteristics of somebody who's along the spectrum and like you said, um Dominic, towards the beginning is like you talk to a company who had strengths in one area and weaknesses in another area. Like in theory, like those characteristics that you identified through that process were ones that are already represented in the model. So I was just curious, like part of it will be to discover kind of where they are, right? Which is a little bit like that's similar to what I'm trying to do with the assessment part. But I was curious, like, are you looking for something different than that, like to strengthen the model maybe, or like,
Yeah. The primary motivation, so I mentioned the maturity model, and that's obviously where this was born out of like the original platform paper that mentioned product thinking, but didn't really define it. And then the maturity model, which mentions product thinking, doesn't really go into depth on, well, how do you operate? Like, what does it mean? How do you operationalize it, right?
Yeah.
And it's in the later stages of maturity, right? Where product is taken seriously. So what this looks like in the current market is more from that point of view. We're less interested in like the totality of how mature you are, although, it's part of the questions, we'll get that out of it. But it's more around the product thinking side. Like, is there a relationship to like the value you're creating? Do you have clear definition of success? How do you understand what problems to work on, and how do you go about finding those out?
So for
Which
me,
are
and this is again like why I'm super interested in this because for me, like I want to go interview the product manager, right? And the product manager in a lot of the organizations that I work with, they have a level of maturity where they already have an orientation toward product and they have a product manager, right? And what I really want to get from this exercise is how to teach other companies what the product role is, what they do, how they do it, like how many you need, like what they're, do you need people who are domain specialized? Do you need somebody who's a generalist? What skills do they need? These are the questions that people ask me. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I think it depends on, your organization. There's a lot of it depends answers for that
Yeah.
question, right? Like,
But
so
there's always, right? I think the pattern is definitely an outcome that we can achieve with that. Like, we talked to 10 companies and like when they were successful, they did this. But I think the first motivation is also, at least from my side, the first motivation is also the maturity model is based on our experience, right? But that's all assumptions. Like it's gut feelings and assumptions. Same as you said, like if I go to a customer, they all have product managers and all that. But there is no data behind it. And especially for me as a product manager, I'm like, yeah, right. But like, is it like that? So this is also a great way to see if those assumptions that we have in the maturity model actually align with the real world and then back it with data. And then we have this thing where we can just say, in level 3, we see companies treat their platform as a product, and that's the next maturity level. And then we can back it up with actual data and, actual quality data instead
Yeah.
of just trust me, bro. Um, and
yeah.
and then out of that we can also say, and the deep dive is, this is what platform as a product even means. This means we have roadmaps. This means we have, support channels and stuff like that.
Yeah, if we were to approach this in like what, how do you become more product minded? Well, I could certainly work with people on like product coaching and like,
Yeah.
let's take a look at your culture. Let's see how you build products. Let's see where the gaps are or misalignment in principles and approach, and move maybe from a process driven kind of company to a product driven kind of company. I don't need this research to like like we were talking, like Dominic mentioned before. You have enough experience, you build a certain intuition around what good work looks like, and you can support people on that path. What I'm curious is, what does reality actually look like across different companies, scale of companies, industries? Because, some folks we talk to, it's like product manager, product owner, project manager. There's like layers.
Yeah.
The role is broken up. I want to understand, well, what do they actually do? Who makes decisions? Who engages in certain kind of work? And then also, if we talk about like product, even to what people ask you, like, how do we have good product managers? How many do we need? Title isn't enough. Once you start talking to people, you see the kind of product manager they are. Sometimes you realize what you have is a very process-driven person, more skewed towards following some template or game plan, not really like what we would consider, like a capital P product person who's comfortable in like figuring, knows the domain, knows technology, knows design, knows
Do
the
I
business.
hear do I hear you bashing us Europeans again?
Huh?
Do I hear
I don't
you
think so.
bashing
I
us
don't think
Europeans
so.
again?
I mean,
No,
I
no.
I see it. I see it every day myself. Like and
So, yeah,
I mean, to some extent, like it's, to me, it's fine. Like if you have more project oriented people in some cases, like especially early on, but it doesn't mean you have the product thinking, right? Like, so I think like we have to get to the capital P product manager kind of approach if they really want to embrace that like product.
but yeah, but I also want to see where that breaks down, right? Like it's all well and good to, like you mentioned, I work with a lot of West Coast Silicon Valley companies, maybe smaller teams, maybe everybody's already kind of philosophically aligned, there's a shorthand already there, and maybe it's not a big leap to like point out a few things and get everybody moving in the same direction. But I'm interested in, like large companies, maybe in other places where like scale and history and regulation means you can't just like quickly jump to this amazing way of approaching things. So, based on the reality of how they currently operate, what can we tease out about maybe what changes can be made or where the most obvious wins are in moving to this model? Because we're not gonna, there's a reason why even the maturity model is, already like a four-stage thing. Product is the same way. You're not gonna magically jump overnight into like, yep, we're all on the same page. We get how to build products amazingly well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you caught on to the original, like the beginning of the assessment stuff that I put in there, but I based it on risk. Like, and so the idea was how could I surface like the most high risk like issues or areas that a company should focus on, based on like where they are, right? And so it wasn't risk in the sense, like Chris, Chris Plank, who's like from one of the banks in NatWest Bank, I think, and he's like, I can't use that word ever, and it's like it's not like a bad word. It's not in the sense of like any sort of compliance or anything like that. It's just a matter of like trying to figure out what are those things, right, that you should what are the things that sit, go to the top that, hey, let's talk about this first because the other stuff, maybe is less important right now, right? It's really about prioritization.
Yeah.
Um,
And who owns that thinking or who drives
I
and
mean,
facilitates?
yeah.
doing the interview just now, I was thinking about potentially like with the different maturity within different parts of the interview script that we had. Like some points they are really amazing, and some points, they know they have a way to go still and some work, which is also like very mature to already acknowledge that and know that, right? But I was thinking about maybe the a nice approach or a nice outcome would be the maturity model for platform products. Because also we have within, even in the interview script, planning, prioritization, feedback, measuring platform success, investment, those are already some sort of dimensions. And like we already have different, like from the talks I had so far, there is different maturities on all of those levels. So it might be an interesting case to also say, hey, within the platform as a product, there is also a maturity with different dimensions.
Yeah, I think that's the way I think most, at least the conversation I've heard around the maturity model, right? You're going to apply it to a company, it's not all going to nicely line up in one maturity
Mm.
uh,
Yeah, it doesn't
phase.
land on one thing, right? It lands on
No,
five things.
I think one
Yeah,
of the
no, no, no. But I mean also that, treating your platform as a product is its own maturity model as well. That
oh
is, you know, you
yeah,
you reach the maturity of handling your platform as a product, but then within that platform as a product, there is a specific maturity model again with different dimensions.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot there in terms of just platform or like product management maturity as it relates to the platform. I'm interested, like one of the interesting things would be to learn, you mentioned Chris and mentioning risk and the baggage some words in some context have, especially in the bank, the word risk.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to know, like in highly regulatory environments, right? Where, compliance, legal, like there are all these gates, and everybody is super afraid, probably for good historical reasons, of having something that makes it through the process that creates liability. And so a lot of rigid process came out of that. Maybe, that's why you have product manager, product owner, project manager, relationship between like a platform team, um, you know, and the rest of the organization and the gates it has to go through to do anything. So I'm curious, like going deeper on that and understanding, is there a path to simplify that? So like if product is better understood, could you simplify the gates and have one person who owns, like a problem space, or who owns a part of the work? So, because like when you break that work down across like four different people, the context, like there isn't a shared context. That's like one of the things I want to know. If I talk to a product owner and a few of the other, PM, PO titles, are they all on the same page even? Like how much falls through as things get handed down to like a team with a backlog executing against some set of work. And I don't really know how you move away from that in like a large, really rigid codified organization. Like if we talk about product maturity, there's probably a very long tail of companies that just it's going to be very tough to move away from what they have.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's going to be super complicated, and I think the mileage is going to vary. Um, I think the challenge for me right now is that when I talked about this a little bit earlier, Michael, when we were chatting, is that I have I have a lot of bias because the customers that I work with
Mm.
or the organizations that I work with are like super mature in many ways, right? They've been doing platform for a long time, 8, 10 years, right? So,
Mm.
um, and they're usually the folks like on stage at KubeCon, sort of leading the charge, I guess. Um, the so what I'm trying to figure out is because I can bring people in, but I don't want to skew the data, I guess is what I'm trying to get to.
Well, part of that is, when you bring people in, we have some metadata on like who they are and where they're based and what their, domain is and how long they've been doing it. And even like what's the actual business, right? Like what business are they operating in? So it'll be interesting to compare that to other companies that we talk to, just to have like
Yeah,
a
so
sense of,
yeah, no, no. So I guess what I'm trying to think about is getting like a cross section of those things. So um like AWS actually just went through this like reorganization over the last year where we were very territory focused. Um, so like I said, last year I had these customers that are all based on the West Coast, and they could be from any industry, right? They could be of varying sizes even like within those industries. Um, and so when I think about this kind of research, I'm thinking about that cross section, right? And so now like a lot of us are like organized by industry focus, right? So I might have healthcare and life sciences, I might have media and entertainment, whatever, right? Um, and I think the profiles, like even within those industries, is very different for us, like from a like an adoption perspective. Like financial services for me was always kind of on the front end of things, in the US, right? And then there was like, probably a couple other industries behind that. Um, and then the other way that we think about, when I think about the companies, our customers at AWS, we have, startups, we have enterprise companies, we have what we call digital native businesses that are just born in the cloud, and therefore, they start using some of this technology much earlier in their life cycle than like a traditional enterprise that's been on-prem in their data center for the last, 100 years or something, right? Um, So I think all those things sort of influence, to your point earlier
Yeah.
about like, what their technology footprint looks like, what their practices look like. Some of it might be influenced by the industry they're in, some of it by their size, right? I talked to a small company the other day who's like trying to figure out a lot of this stuff too. And, like they don't need a platform, right? And even like I think there's been some recent discussion about qualification from a maturity standpoint or qualification from a platform engineering standpoint. Like, should these people be going down this path to begin with? I don't know, probably not, right? Um, so I'm like holistically just trying to figure out who should
Yeah.
I bring in to help complete that sort of picture of if you have this profile, or maybe we don't care right now, let's just get whoever we can and then we
Well,
can.
it's yeah, we've gone broad. Right
Yeah,
now it is of the get whoever we can, um and also get interviewers on board. Part of doing research in this like community way, the idea is we should have a pretty sizable supply of interviewers, right? So we should theoretically be able to go broad, or I guess really part of the maybe let's say meta assumptions around like the research in the community like this, the approach is how wide can we go? Where does it fall
ample
apart as a
sample.
yeah.
Yeah.
And to your point, that's data we're collecting and we need to continuously collect, like industry, what's like the vertical you operate in. Um, part of the in terms of like digital native or have you been a company that's been around forever is starting with background information on like how old is the platform, right? Like just getting into how long have you been working on this, how long has it been around before you, to just kind of gauge mature like some level of platform history and maturity within that organization. So those are all ways we're going to kind of categorize to see where companies plop in so we can see where there are obvious gaps. Like financial services, you said being at the forefront for you in the US. I wonder what that looks like in Europe. And maybe if we interview folks in Asia or, EMEA, um, more broadly, can we see what that looks like? Like, is there, US is leading the charge, and then there's like varying levels of maturity throughout, varying sizes of institutions. We have assumptions, but we don't really, I mean,
Yeah.
we don't really know. So that's one of the ways now. Categorize the stuff, go wide, see where the gaps are, and then start being more intentional about recruiting the kinds of companies that we actually want to talk to fill out the data set. At least
I don't
that's
think, yeah, I don't think interviewees is not our problem at this point. Our problem is more the interviewer side. We
yeah.
need to
Well, I
get
guess,
going and get people on board.
I mean, if I think about this from like a pure research perspective, like most of these types of things that I've seen are done in a survey format. Like, so you could distribute that, like you could distribute this to, 1,000 people quickly, get a whole bunch of data back, and you have this data set. So you said this outcome is based on 300 300 surveyors of like 1,000 or whatever, and it's like that's usually what I've seen, like from a research perspective, as opposed to like actually talking to these people, recording the conversation, like all that kind of stuff. So that's one of the things I'm thinking about. If you really want to scale this or get like get that cross section, like you're gonna have to like probably change the way you're collecting the data potentially. What do you
So
guys think?
yeah, we had those conversation early days. Part of this was very intentionally to go deeper in conversations to like pull the thread of what people say and understand the motivation, um, and kind of behavior and approach behind things in a way that is nearly impossible in surveys. Like you can collect like what do you do within a very narrow kind of way, unless we, I don't know, create some sort of interactive survey.
Well, I guess one of the things that I'm thinking about here is that there's definitely value in the interview, right? Um, so I think there's like what I'm sort of teasing out here is like there's the need for like kind of both, I feel like. One is could you distribute this and get, 300 responses, right? And then that will be sort of like a baseline of like, hey, this is what we see across these 300 organizations of these sizes. And it gives you like the high level data points, right?
Yeah.
And then you have say 30 or 40 like deep dive discussions where you can fill in the gaps and say, okay, well, we saw, this cohort of customers or organizations that had these characteristics, and we talked to these 30, people that said these things, which gives like a richer context to not just the paper, which is like very like flat, right?
Yeah. And it's a good call. We talked about that too, like going wide, getting aggregate, being more deliberate. We wanted to see how far we could get with, I guess part of it is we had these grand ambitions about how fast this would move and how many people would join.
Yeah.
And I think at this point you may very well be right that like it's been slow moving. It would make sense to offset this with just like a ton of aggregate data that's self-serve. And then part of it is also those surveys become, a qualification recruitment tool for the kinds of folks we actually want to talk to round it out. I think one
I
doesn't
mean,
preclude.
yeah, we had two things going with that. One was that we already have done a survey in the platform working group. And the
Yeah,
second one is we were thinking about doing one for KubeCon for like that was one of the long discussions where we wanted to do it for recruiting purposes, but I was like very, very strong on let's just get some data and see what we can do with that. Uh,
Yeah.
so maybe it's time to admit that this isn't moving as fast as we want to and as widely as we want to go deep on these and then be intentional with the interviews.
I mean, I don't think that I mean, I don't I think that we could get more people. Like I think that it's like right now it feels so for me like just joining this and asking a lot of questions you guys have already talked about.
Good
Um
questions.
part of it is, people just don't know about how to get in the community or whatever. I think I've seen like even last week, like I don't know if you guys attended the meeting this last week, but there was like more newcomers, like people are finding it, right? Like a little bit more. I think like with KubeCon coming up, there will be more interest. Like when we start publicizing more about the assessment work that, or this, like when you start talking about these things, people are going to be more interested. I am, right? And I work with like I mean, I work with a global team of people that do this. So I could tap into that community and say, "Hey, I need 10 interviewers and I need people who are in UK, France, Australia, I have all those people, right? Like I can ask them to like, hey, come do this thing, right? Like,
So
but
I think, yeah, let's then start being a little more intentional and less wishful. I think that's the um so for a little context, originally when we kind of piggybacked on the survey and then it got kind of whittled down around the platform paper, around the KubeCon in I think maybe Paris, or I forget which one it came out during. And and so we had this, kind of branching survey, whether you're a consumer, builder, or a leader of a platform, we defined it, and then you had questions based on that, right? It didn't go that widely, part of it visibility and promotion issue. So if we do it now in a much more intentional way and disseminate something like that widely to get like a good amount of relatively quick aggregate data on just the same kind, more or less the same kind of breakdown, right? Like, how does this happen today in your organization? We get the metadata around like what kind of organization we're talking to. Have that as almost a parallel thing, get as much of that as we can. It doesn't prevent us from continuing to interview because that's still valuable. Then we use the survey results as a way to qualify of, like 4 to 5 companies we want to talk to in whatever each vertical or each size or segment, however we break it down. So there is representation.
Yeah,
And
I mean that
that
could be.
you know,
I don't want to change what you guys are doing. I just really want to understand like what it is and how I can do it. So like the things that came to mind is like how do I record it? Do I have to use a certain like tool? Um, do I have to schedule meetings in a certain way? Like the process around it. And I think there's some in the research guide, it talks some about that. I don't know if it covers all that. Like I was looking at the flow chart.
yeah, it needs a little simplification. But right now it's kind of like leads in the who've opted into the PAP research group, pulling co-interviewers from the group or from outside. So we, kind of a recruiting tool. And then we have either in Slack or email, personally reaching out to the interviewee, scheduling a time, and then there's a form to submit, a link to the video. We don't have shared tools that we can give out, right? So it's pretty much on everybody to record with whatever they have
Okay.
linked to it. Yeah. And then what we want is to turn those, like anonymize those, like turn the video into a script, anonymize that data. That's what is on the back end for synthesis. Like the transcripts we'll be looking at to start teasing out themes and patterns and insights. That being said, I don't think this is a conversation that's been long running. We've been, this has been kind of up and down in terms of priority for everybody at
Yeah.
varying degree week over week. So I think at this point, if we're going to be very intentional about like getting the value we want out of it, one is we probably need to bring back a survey, which Dominic is super happy about. We need to send it out widely. That becomes a recruiting tool to be more intentional about the companies we want to talk to, aside from companies that, folks that opt in to be interviewed anyway. And then do those things kind of in parallel. Uh,
I think that's a great approach. I mean, I think like just trying to scale interviewing, especially when you have like three different personas that you want to go after, is gonna be like a
and
2 year project.
it
Like,
was an ambitious, it's already taking forever. It's an ambitious project. And I think yeah, I think the big thing is like, it's one thing when you're on a team within your company and it's focused research and like, exactly what you want to learn or explore, whatever form of research it is, and you control the entire process and it's your job to focus on it day to day. It's another thing when it's like
yeah.
ever
Well, I
moving
did.
priority.
I mean, I guess to your guys' earlier point, like, when I was pitching the assessment work, like there was a lot of questions from folks about like whether it was ground in research or not, right? Like, and like my answer to that is yes, it's ground in research from the perspective of like I hear this and I collect these observations on a day-to-day basis. Like that's my job.
Yeah.
Um, so yes, like I talk to these organizations every day. Every day I see these patterns, I write these things down. Um, is it a research project? No, it's in the course of work that happens. And it's been happening for a long time, right? So um it's not done in this like very confined process and right,
Yeah.
but
And there's
it's still
no
found
limit.
in it's not stuff I just made up like yesterday. It's actually from like and the other thing I think people sort of forget about is this is fastly evolving. Like platform engineering is like not a new concept, but it's like been reborn over the last like year, really, or 2 years or something, right? Like where we moved from DevOps to platform engineering or SRE to platform engineering or whatever, right? So um yeah, so I mean, how much research are you going to do on something that's like fairly new and people are like changing the organizational structure, or changing the roles that they have, or you know, even like platforms last year or 2 years ago for me was like a huge Kubernetes cluster with lots of tenants on it, right? And platforms today sometimes look like that, but often look completely different, right? They often look like uh multiple clusters like for different purposes and
I think
golden
part of
golden paths and things like that.
yeah, you're talking about, yeah, the like the approach to building. Um, if part of this is like, how do you package what we do up and then deploy it with some frequency where it's not this painful process every time? Like we go through the pain now, figure out what works. Because it's fast moving, something you could roll out with whatever, some cadence to see a snapshot in time, like how are things actually changing? I think you're right. In order to do that effectively, beyond just like, our interest started with like product thinking, like how do you approach the work as a missing piece? Uh, but I think surveys that you can continuously roll out and off of that schedule interviews is probably the model in the future that makes the most sense. It's a lot more focused. It's a lot easier to roll out.
I
And you
would
can be,
say I would say at least for like the builder persona and the you had three personas. Who was the other one? The
yeah,
consumer.
I was builder, consumer, and
Leader.
then
For the leader persona, I think you're gonna have a hard time getting like a VP level person to give you like a survey response. And I think those are a little bit gonna
builder.
be more high touch, like relationship oriented
Yeah,
things. But I think that they would be eager, at least the ones that I am more f familiar with, like would be eager to contribute to that kind of thing because yeah, for probably a few different reasons. But yeah, I think they would be, yeah.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think in my experience, the same thing. It's network and relationships. It's high touch. They'll talk through it. The idea is to set the environment where they can be as candid as possible.
Yeah.
And also they want to learn, part of it is they always want to learn about, well, what are other people doing? Like
Yes.
what's working? Yeah. So I think there's a lot of value both ways for that. And they get the benefit of seeing what's happening in the space, right? And learning from it. So in terms of, let's say, concrete steps out of this, we and Dominic, we have pieces of this already, right? Like it's not a huge leap to do a survey. It's probably super simple. And then use the survey as a to finish out the other scripts based on how we're going to be qualifying for.
I mean, I would just strongly stay within the platform engineering interviewing script. I think a lot of the questions that we have there can be just turned into survey questions. Some of them can't, and some of them will be more on the nose because, we wanted to be deliberate that we don't push people into a specific direction. If we have like multiple choice, then we will push them into a specific direction. But again, there's some cost on having more data, and
Yeah, there's going to be a
that's
huge
fine.
drop off. If every question is open-ended, it becomes a survey that's going to have a higher drop off rate. But
Sure.
if this is the balance, right, of like trying to get their canned answers. So we'll
I
see. So let's go through, like, that's one thing. Let's go through that exercise again of just turning that, like, the actual script into back, I guess, into a survey. And then from there, go with the consumer one. Leadership one, we just save as a script. Like, what do we want to learn from leaders? That's a network play. Like, we have to reach out to folks and set up interviews. But I think that makes sense to just go as wide as we can. The next thing is obviously distribution, right? Corbin, you said you can easily do that on your end just through AWS network, through CNCF as well. We need to get it out. And then anybody else who has like a nice personal network through work or because
I
then
Yeah,
we
I'm
will create
wondering.
a I'll create a Google form this weekend. I have some time this weekend
yeah,
and just play around with it and then share it in our pub research channel. And we
I
can
think that's gonna
discuss
go a
it.
long way for moving this along.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Corbin,
I'm
you're gonna say,
wondering like how like our so for me like it doesn't work in this context, but like for me, like I can go to like my marketing team and say, hey, I want to do this research and I want you guys to fund like a survey, right? And they'll hire somebody who does that, right? Like usually there's these organizations that do that kind of work. I don't know if we necessarily need that, but but that would be another thing. I don't know if like the CNCF would fund something like this, but I wonder if you could make a proposal for them to do that, like fund this research. I don't know if they fund the annual CNCF survey, right? I don't know who conducts that.
Do they run? I mean, we essentially have all the pieces for it, right? And I think in terms of the questions and shape of it, we want to keep it to, the practitioners uh, creating it. The question is really disseminating it, right? Like, how do we do that in an effective manner to go wide and start getting responses?
Yeah, so this I was just looking it up, right? The this is the 2023 one. It looks like it says it's conducted by the Linux Foundation Research and its
Oh,
partners. 59 questions. Um, they
ours
had
isn't even
they had 37,000 or 3,735 candidates and they collected 988 records.
okay. That's great.
More than 2,700 candidates were disqualified due to extensive pre-screening, survey screening questions, and data quality checks. Um, the result in a margin of error of 2.6% and a 90% confidence level. So I mean, it's a very scientific approach.
Yeah, I've done those with
Yeah.
sample rates. There's like a nice little formula of how many people you need to talk to and getting confidence rate. And then pre-qualification surveys that lead to like the actual survey or bundled together so you're qualifying out everything early on. But I mean, I think we have all the like in terms of that, we have all the pieces, right? I don't think that is our problem. Um, and it's going to slow this down in a meaningful way, I think, to try to coordinate the thing that I think we already have. What we I think it goes back to um distribution.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is like a separate thread, and I think we have 3 minutes. So I guess what I understand is, right now you have the guide for the engineer primarily, right? Is it that
Yeah,
one option, or are you guys using it for both the builder and the consumer?
we're just using it for builder. The consumer one would have some overlap, obviously, in terms of the other end of those questions, right?
Yeah.
But we don't have it, and we haven't interviewed any consumers.
Okay. So I need to identify like a few builders. How long does it take?
45 minutes.
Okay. So set up an hour meeting, record the meeting, and then just run through the questions. No prompting, just let them kind of talk and then just continue the flow.
Yeah, so in this, I mean, in terms of like the actual process of interviewing, it's, you get in the room, you thank them for their time, you give them the spiel about the video won't live past the research. The thing that's going to live past it is anonymized. It's just a transcript. The video is only going to be seen by like, you and your co-interview and a few leads. That's it.
Okay.
Um, Part of it is like really double down on that to just make them feel as comfortable as you possibly can that, their words of we want candor as much as we can facilitate. And and then you start asking the questions, you pull on any thread that's interesting, like if they're being a little evasive or it's too superficial or there are nudges next to the questions to like give the interviewer a little more context about like what we really want out of that question. And then co-interviewer's job is to kind of take notes or interesting things as they come up. There's a transcript, but it's good to capture like in the moment interesting things you want to review at the end of the call. And they're going to keep you on time. That's part of their job too, to make sure you don't go on a tangent, too technical when that's not needed or unrelated thing or just over time. And then you get through it. You thank them for their time. You see if they have any questions. Usually people have some questions. And then that's usually where we also ask for referrals because they went through this interview and they usually won't be able to answer some of those questions. Like I'm even thinking about the investment and funding thing, just pulling it out of the builder one because they can almost never answer that question. That's a leadership question. So I think we can tighten up the script itself. And
I mean, yeah. I know that they're not going to answer that question, but it's a good one to ask because they should sort of have an idea of that because they should be thinking about like, how do I influence that? Like,
The
uh,
rationale. If you're a senior builder, you're thinking about the team from an investment standpoint. So I think what we maybe could do is whittle it down or leave it if like the reason we left it is like if you ask that first question, you're like, oh, you actually know these things? Let's go through the section. If we ask that question like, oh, it's clear you have no idea, we'll skip it. So that's part of the interview too. Like if they can't answer, just skip the section.
yeah.
And that's when we get to referrals at the end. It's like, well, you couldn't answer questions about prioritization. Could we speak to your product owner or could we speak to somebody else? Can we talk to somebody on an application team, right? So get referrals at the end.
Okay.
That's kind of the flow of it. I think I need to like if you read through this again and if you can kind of comment on like where there is a lack of clarity.
I mean, it looks pretty straightforward. I mean, I've been doing this stuff for a while and I have that assessment thing. So a lot of it's like, there's a lot of overlap, frankly. And then there's like a lot of stuff. Like I'm comfortable with everything. I'll ask you in Slack if there's anything I need more clarity on, but I think it's fine. I just was more curious about how to execute and if I needed to use like Zoom or, other things like that, the logistics part. So I think the other thing that I'm probably gonna think about, it sounds like there needs to be a second person. It would be
Yes.
good to like it'd be good to pair up. So like I'm gonna try to pair up with Colin or I'm gonna try to pair up with, maybe somebody I work with and say, hey, like, will you pair up with me on this exercise? Let's see if we can, because just from a scheduling and logistics perspective, it'll just be easier for me to like work with one person consistently and say, hey, let's do this next one, or I have this person lined up. Like it'll be easier for me to like schedule and try to get some of these done.
And it's however you feel comfortable, right? Like, and if you want to bring in somebody else that you want to get this experience, like part of it is you want them to go through these cycles because maybe they haven't. And then, you let them lead at some point to be comfortable doing it. Like that's kind of part of this too, is to get more people exposed to even interviewing. Because I think a lot of people who haven't gone through the first impulse is to like jump in and start telling you what's wrong or like being opinionated in an interview
Yeah,
where they're
like
trying
me.
to yeah, it's hard. I
Yeah.
mean, people need to suppress themselves, especially if they're doing the work day in, day out. So
Okay.
yeah, we're a little over
Yeah, I gotta
time.
run.
Yeah,
But thank you guys. This was super helpful. I'll reach out via Slack.
yeah,
Michael,
let's
as
continue
I
that there.
get closer, like I'm gonna start asking some people to do this. And as I get closer to it, I may have some more questions or whatever, but um I think after I do the first one, or maybe I can bring one of you guys in to help me with that first one,
Yeah,
um
yeah.
we can kind of debrief on that process and then I can get like a rhythm and try to get more done. But yeah.
That's what we want. That's a good word for it, rhythm. Anyway, let's continue in Slack. I'll just sum up on the action items, but otherwise, thanks a lot for joining. This is good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, nice to talk to you both. Cheers,
Yeah,
guys. All right.
bye.
See you around. Bye bye.